Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. A Santa Fe whistle climbed over the bluffs and shook dust from the cottonwoods. Dry Creek Station, 2 rooms of clapboard and a stove that smoked when the wind was wrong, woke as it always did to the iron screen children scrambling from under. Porches, ranch hands pausing with their coffee, the telegraph man wiping coal dust from his spectacles like it was ritual. The platform shivered when the engine coughed to a stop. Heat made every nailhead glint. Taza stepped down from the car with the studied care of a tall man who has learned how not to break the world by touching it. He bowed beneath the awning without meaning to, a habit built from countless doorframes. That cut the sky too low. He wore a plain blue work shirt and a coat he'd folded under his arm, despite the heat. His hair, thick and black, was bound at the nape with a strip of rawhide. A canvas roll rode his shoulder, and in his breast pocket, a folded advertisement rubbed a polished corner against his heart with every step. A woman on the platform squeaked, hand to her throat. A boy said, too loud, "Ma, he's taller than the horse posts," and laughed in the raw way of children. A black stovepipe hat turned to follow him reverent, Holcomb mouth tightening as if it hurt to be made to look. Taza kept his eyes forward. He had learned early that the room would measure him, so he did not help it. He measured for himself the width of the platform boards, the distance to the freight office, the way the shade broke in ragged wedges under the roofline. He could hear the river, thin from summer, moving under reeds beyond town. He could smell yeast from the bakery and the bleached hide stink from the tannery lane. He could taste iron in the air from the rails, the way all tracks made a tiny fog you never saw but always swallowed. "Big fella," said a man with a scar across his cheek, one hip weighted by habit toward a pistol. Too big to be comfortable. He wasn't talking to Taza. He was announcing Taza to the ground, staking first claim on the words. The men near him chuckled. That chuckle sounded to Taza like poker chips being shuffled habit, not humor. He moved past them to the station office and set his canvas roll by his boot. The station master, a ruddy man with hands like small hams, looked up through the grill. His gaze flicked to the top of Taza's head and stayed there a beat too long, stuck like a cow in a ditch. "Ticket?" the man asked, though Taza had already arrived. "Return stub," Taza said, and set it on the ledge. His voice was low and even, the way a river talks when it is deep. The station master stamped the paper as if stamping authority back into the moment. "You got folks meeting you?" he asked. "I have an address." Taza tapped his breast pocket. The station master's eyes did not move from the place where the paper must be. "Where are you from?" "South," Taza said. "Far enough the grass grows like hair if you stop looking at it." That answer made the man choose between curiosity and the limits of his authority. He chose the job. Baggage claims round the side. He muttered. Taza collected his roll, and the town collected its whispers. The blacksmith leaned off his anvil like a tree bending. The schoolteacher, Miss Fitch, frowned in that worried way she wore even with the groceries. The sheriff Noel Brady, a man whose belly arrived wherever he went just before his badge watched from the shade of the feed store. He pushed his hat back with one finger and did not move, which was a way of moving. On the walk into town, the heat took Taza's breath in small taxes. The street was a long scrape of baked mud. The flies wrote their own slow script over everything that smelled of sugar or blood. He counted 7 buildings on one side, 5 on the other, 2 pretending to be more by adding a second story that looked like a man standing on tiptoe at a parade. Dry Creek did not aspire to grandeur. It aspired to last the winter. He passed the telegraph office where wire hissed a code like locusts. He passed a board tacked with announcements, horses lost, wagon wheels for sale, a poster for a traveling show that had never arrived. A fresh broadside carried a neat hand and a St. Louis address. Wives sought for frontier gentlemen respectable, God-fearing, industrious, age 20 to 40. The paper was the brother to the one against his heart. He had answered his first. Advertisement in a boarding house in Winslow, with sunlight striking motes over a chipped basin. He had sat on the edge of a bed that called itself a bed only because it wasn't a bench, and he'd composed words in English he'd collected carefully over the years. My name's Taza. I break horses and mend fences. I can make a fire in rain. I cook simple. I don't drink often. I am taller than most men. He'd put that last line in and taken it out 3 times before letting it stand. He'd written that he wanted a wife who liked quiet and could laugh without asking permission. He had folded the letter and walked it to a post with a stone in his chest and a likeness in his feet he hadn't felt since boyhood. Clara May's first reply had smelled faintly of lavender. Dear Sir, she wrote, as if trying on respect like a hat. Your letter was plain, which I prize. My father was a plain-spoken man, and he did our family no harm with it. I am 22. I keep a ledger. BALANCED. I do not faint. I am not afraid of work. She'd drawn a line through, I do not faint, and then, in smaller hand above it, much. She'd admitted to a fondness for Lily and small cakes, for order in her cupboards, for stories that end how they ought. There was a curl of humor in her. Words that made him fold the letter and unfold it twice, just to taste it again. They wrote back and forth for 6 months. He had told her he was Apache. He did not write around that fact. It wasn't a thorn he could hide with a glove. He said it the way he said he was tall. He wrote his people's name in his own tongue, once and then again in English. Each letter a footstep across thorn country. I have worked for ranchers and for the railroad, he'd added. I read some English. I know Psalm 23. He did not write the other parts. How he had carried water to his mother when the cough wouldn't let her sleep. How the river near the place where he was born ran in spring like a singer who knows only one song and sings it perfectly. How a boy had once measured himself against Taza's shadow and announced he would grow to be a bridge dot. Now he turned toward the parlor house, which had decided it was respectable by painting its shutters green and keeping a lace curtain between the ladies and the window. A piano made of more hope than oak was being hammered inside. The song clinked like coins on a tabletop. Men laughed in the tone that meant the night was still early enough to be harmless. Taza took the side stairs where the boards were worn. By more private traffic got at the top, a hallway kept itself narrow by design. There were 3 doors. The middle one stood open with light spilling into the dim like something gentle had been poured out. Inside, a woman sat on a chair too pretty for the room, a straight-backed thing with spindles, like she wanted the chair to stop her from leaning toward the future. She rose when Taza filled the doorway. She was smaller than he had imagined and tidier, the edges of her dress and her hair showing choices rather than accidents. She had features that would not be improved by ornament. She smoothed the air between them with both hands, an unconscious gesture of hospitality that had nowhere to land. You're Mr. Taza, she said. The way she spoke his name carried careful balance, as if any syllable thrown wrong would tip both of them. She did not offer her hand. She looked him up first at his shirt, then his mouth, and then, finally, to the place above his hat brim, where other men stopped looking. Surprise rose in her eyes, and then swam away as if she'd been ready for a fish and found the river. He said. He kept his hat in his hands. The room smelled like starch, and a single lily rescued from yesterday. I thought, she stopped, and the rest of her sentence tugged on the air between them like a thread that had snagged. She had Clara May eyes, the ones that had smiled from the paper, laughing small at themselves for the indulgence. Those eyes peered now as if the words in the letters were here too, lining up beside him. "You wrote me," Taza said quietly. "I came." She swallowed and tried for composure. "Yes, yes, of course. Please have a seat." He looked at the chair. He felt the way a river must feel when asked to sit in a teacup. He chose a spot by the window and leaned his shoulders into the corner. Careful, as a man carrying fire through dry grass. They spoke. Or rather, she asked questions. How long had the journey taken? What work did he hope to find here? Did he know? Anyone, and he answered with the same evenness of his letters. He told her he could shoe a horse and plow a straight furrow, that he mended what he broke, that he came with no debts and no bottle. He did not tell her the number of times a room had gone silent around him. He did not tell her that sometimes he woke in the night and checked the width of the doorframe with his hands, as if the house might have shrunk while he slept. One had pressed into her palm, too warm to be counterfeit, too strange to spend. "I didn't know," she said. "I wrote it," he replied. "Yes," she nodded, a little helpless. "I read it. I didn't hold it, I guess." Silence stretched. He could feel the timbers of the building breathe. He could hear the clock in the hall counting in a language all clocks know. When she spoke again, her voice had softened in a way that told the truth. "I'm sorry. I think the letters made a different picture. A man I could look at without looking up." The gentlest air in him went still. He had expected this wound, but not where she would put the knife. He did not blame her for the place she stood on the earth. He had been blamed enough times for his own. He said only, "I understand." "I wish I were braver," she murmured. "You are," he said, and meant it, because she was telling the truth while it still had teeth. There were conventions for these moments, and the town had written them. She reached for them automatically. "It's not only that," she added, though they both knew it was mostly that. "It's, I will not be enough for a life so large." "You are enough," he said, and then stood, because he could not help her fight herself in this small room any longer. The ceiling seemed to drop when he rose. The lamp chimed against its hook in a small alarm. He caught it without touching, and waited until it stopped. Clara May turned away, palms pressed to the bodice of her dress, as if smoothing wrinkles that had not been made. When she turned back, she wore the face of a ledger balanced to the penny. "I'm sorry, Mr. Taza." He bowed, not deeply, not as if this were theater, but in the old way that let air move between two people again. "I am sorry, too," he said. He set his hat on his head and took the door with the practice of a man who has been told no by rooms. In the hallway, the piano stumbled over a chord and recovered with cheer it didn't feel. The staircase creaked once under him, then twice, like a code. The street met him with whole brightness, the kind you cannot blink away. Across the way, the blacksmith raised his chin in what might have been respect or might have been a challenge, and Taza answered it by existing, which was answer enough. Two boys held a stick between them like a lance and took turns trying to reach his shoulder from a distance they dignified as safety dotted the corner. He paused. He took the paper from his pocket and unfolded it. The advertisement was creased into quarters and then into faith. He looked at the St. Louis address and the neat black letters offering order to the disorder of human hearts. He put it back. He walked to the livery, because work was the one answer that didn't skip when the needle hit a crack. The owner, Amos Daly, paused from currying a bain-marie and looked up. Amos's hair had gone gray in one streak that started at his temple like lightning. His eyes landed on Taza's shoulders and kept climbing. "You the fella just come in on the Santa Fe?" Amos asked. "I am," Taza said. "You handle horses?" "I listen to them," Taza replied. Amos's mouth quirked. "Same thing if your ears are good." He jerked a thumb toward a stall. "Got a sorrel that thinks a bridle is an insult." You calm him, and there's $1 in it. Taza slipped the coat onto a peg and stepped into the straw with the sorrel. The horse rolled one large eye at him and showed teeth. Taza stood still until the horse had time to choose something else to be. He spoke low in words that had soothed colts behind the red mesa, words with edges worn round by use. He put his palm against the horse's neck where the muscle jumped and waited for the jump to listen to his hand. Outside, someone laughed at something that wasn't funny. The fly buzz hummed. The sorrel blew out a breath that smelled like old apples and let his head drop 2 inches. 2 inches was a treaty. Amos watched without pretending not to watch. He saw when the horse's feet stopped tapping small insults into the ground. He saw when Taza lifted the bridle and the sorrel did not rear, only sighed about it like it was a compromise made among gentlemen. $1.50, Amos said. You didn't just calm him. You told him a story he liked better. $1 is enough, Taza answered. He took the coin anyway when Amos insisted and tucked it into his pocket like respect. By the time the sun made a red rim on the horizon and the smolter smoke in the east turned to purple thread, Taza had watered 6 stalls, patched a torn girth, and tied 2 square knots for a boy who'd only ever known tangles. He fed himself at the back of the kitchen at the boarding house beans and a heel of bread and coffee that tried to be brave and paid a nickel for it with the coin Amos had pressed into his hand. He did not go back to the parlor house or to any room that had decided who he was before he arrived. He walked instead toward the far edge of Dry Creek, where the cottonwoods held on to their green, and where a half-collapsed barn leaned into a slope as if the earth were a friend it could nap against. He had slept in worse places. He spread his canvas roll in the loft and lay down with the swallow-chur above him for company, and the smell of old hay remembering last year's sun. He stared through a crack in the roof at a square of sky turning from blue to indigo. He let the whole day pass over his mind like a palm smoothing a wrinkled shirt. The train's iron breath, the boy's uninjured laughter, Clara May's careful kindness, the moment her courage made it stop, the sorrel's surrender to gentleness. He watched each thing and did not argue with it. When the stars burned clear, so clear the Big Dipper looked drunk with its own light, he spoke in his first language, the one he did not let the town put the wrong shape on. He did not ask for a particular woman or a particular ending. He asked because asking is the only brave act you can do alone. Let whatever is mine find me without breaking. A cricket climbed onto the beam and made his old complaint about summer. A night breeze came through the missing slat and cooled his face. Out in the distance, something barked coyote or dog. He could not say, and then another answered it in a speech of their own. He slept, finally, not because the world grew kind, but because he had worked enough for his body to forgive his heart. In the morning, he would be the man he had been again, tall as consequence, quiet as river water, stubborn as rope. The town would arrange itself around him, the way water does around a rock whispering, parting, sometimes trying to wear him down. He would let it talk. He would keep his hands gentle for whatever needed gentleness. He would not bend his spine into a shorter shape to fit, for now, under rafters that had once held hay sweet as sugar, and now held only starlight, Taza lay like a column and did not feel alone so much as unaccompanied. That is a different thing, and a less dangerous one. In a few days, the mercantile would need flour sacks lifted, and a woman with steady eyes would ask for a jar from the high shelf. But that was not tonight's work. Tonight's work was only to arrive, to absorb the measurement of Dry Creek, and to let the town exhaust itself against the simplest fact of him, that he had come here by choice, carrying a folded piece of paper, and a willingness to be seen, even by those who could not yet look up. Dry Creek woke the way it always did, coffee bitter as boot leather, dogs arguing with wagons, Somebody sweeping last night out the front door and onto the street. Taza folded his canvas roll and climbed down from the hayloft with the soft, careful movements of a man who had spent a lifetime not colliding with the world. He washed at the pump behind the livery, cool water numbing his hands, and let the morning take the measure of him again. Amos Daly met him with a nod and a pitchfork. Got 3 stalls to muck and a mule that believes in his own religion. He said, "You look like a man who can argue theology." Taza smiled with his eyes and took the fork. The mule named Consequence showed him one rolling glare and a half-hearted kick. Taza shifted his weight, talked in a low stream, and Consequence reconsidered the nature of faith. By noon, the sorrel from yesterday had decided not to be offended by harness. The mule had conceded that hay belonged in nets instead of underfoot, and Amos had offered another $1. "You ever think about staying steady here?" the liveryman asked, wiping his forehead with a bandana that had seen better colors. "Regular pay, regular board. Can't offer glory, but it buys beans and a place to lay your head that ain't full of all pellets." "I think about steady," Taza said. "Steady doesn't always think about me." Amos grunted, which could be agreement or a pebble stuck in his boot. "You get hungry. You come through that door. That's all the permission you need." Taza ate behind the boarding-house kitchen again, where the cook slid him a plate without asking a lot of questions. "You ain't a talker," she observed. "Good. Talkers spill salt." He carried his coffee to the back steps and watched the town arrange itself. The street had rules. Cowhands owned midday, respectable ladies owned late afternoon, drunks argued over the space between dusk and trouble. Children owned the alleys outright. Everybody owned the well. Even a stranger knew that. A boy trotted up to him like a colt edging near a fence. "Mister," he blurted, "is the weather different?" "At your height?" Taza sipped. "More wind," he said gravely. "Less dust." The boy blinked, considering this, then ran off to report climatology to his gang. Word of a new man travels faster than the telegraph when the wire is gossip. It was the Reverend Holcomb who named the thing out loud. On Sunday, Taza stood at the churchyard fence and listened without crossing inside. The preacher chose his text like a man selects a nail. Tower of Babel. Pride that stretches too high. The words fell like little stones pitched toward him, glancing off ribs that knew the shape of such impacts. A few parishioners turned, then pretended they hadn't. Taza studied the cottonwood's bark instead and mouthed a different scripture in a different language, the one that says still waters are not always shallow. He did odd jobs all that week. He hammered new slats into Mrs. Keene's fence while her chickens debated the ethics of escape. He climbed a windmill for the Rojas place, grease and sun turning the ladder into a lesson about hands. From the top he could see the land relax past Dry Creek Low, brown and honest about it. He didn't mind the height. The air up there felt like room. He stopped at the tailor's on Wednesday, because even a tall man can't live forever in one shirt. Mr. Peabody measured him with the grim poetry of a man watching his reputation shorten. The tape kept running out of numbers and patience. 6 foot. The tailor muttered, then added something in fractions and dismay. He set down the chalk like it offended him. "I can let out a seam, but I can't invent cloth, sir." "Then don't," Taza said easy. "Patch what you can. I'll pay for your honesty." Peabody's wife slid him a cookie while her husband fussed with shame and thread. "There's more than one kind of fit," she whispered, eyes kind. "You wear quiet better than most." On Thursday, a riderless calf bawled itself into a ditch south of town. Taza heard it from the road and followed the sound. The arroyo was too steep for a rope alone. He slid down and planted his boots wide, then levered the calf upward by inches. A grunt for each inch, mud slicking his arms. When he finally shouldered the animal over the lip, it folded into the dust and thought about being grateful. "The brand," said Caldwell. A hired man arrived late and breathing hard, hat in his hands, an apology in his mouth. "Mr. Caldwell, say thanks," the hand panted. "He'll say it like it cost money, but he'll mean it." When Caldwell himself rode in that afternoon big hat, thin patience, money that had learned to scowl, he nodded once at Taza. "You break horses?" "I listen to them," Taza answered. Another nod, measuring the difference. "Pays $1 a day and dinner. Half if you fall off." "I fall soft," Taza said. "Soft men hit the ground harder," Caldwell replied, and rode away satisfied with his wit. That night, Caldwell's men made room for Taza at the fire, and also made room for their talk to land within his hearing. "Look at him," one said, skewering beans on a knife tip. "He's a whole fence post. Bet he hits his head on the stars," another offered. "Bet he don't fit in a coffin," a third added, laughing like a tin cup against a rock. Ate and let their words pass around him the way smoke does, stinging a little, but drifting on. A young hand with a kindly face leaned in when the others wandered off to cards. "They don't mean harm," he said. "They mean not to mean harm," Taza corrected. "That's different." "Guess it is," the kid said, and chewed that. Sentence like a tough cut of meat. Friday brought the saloon. You can avoid a saloon only so long in a town that thinks it is a living room. Taza stepped in to deliver a crate for the mercantile, nails and 2 jars of penny candy, and the room went quiet in that way that brags about not going quiet. A gambler in a red waistcoat with a white scar like a lightning fork across his cheek tipped his hat without respect. He had a name like Styles or Smiles, and both fit. "You friend with the thundercloud?" he asked the room, or we all just letting him throw shade. Laughter twanged. Sheriff Noel Brady lifted neither his grin nor his boots from the spittoon-guarding stance he preferred. "Leave it," he said, not looking at anyone you could arrest. Styles leaned back in his chair until it rocked across the edge of falling. "Hey, Mountain," he said to Taza, voice sugar slick. "You from the tribe that stacks men to pick apples?" Taza set the crate on the counter. He had the trick of moving slowly without looking slow. "I'm from the tribe that moves around a fool instead of over him," he said, tone mild as creek water. The room did that little intake of breath that means a line was drawn so clean. "You don't bleed until you admire it." Styles grinned sharp. "Big man's got a mouth." Taza considered and shook his head. "Just enough for food." Something in the gambler's eyes scratched. He stood like a cat pretending to stretch. "Maybe you and me ought to." Sheriff Brady finally rotated his bulk 5 degrees in the direction of work. "You ought to let it go, Styles," he said. Still gentle. "Man's delivering candy to children." Which was nearly true. Miss Fitch herself stepped through the batwings at that unfortunate moment. A school book clutched to her middle like a shield and scolded Taza by accident of timing. "Mr. Daly," she said brightly to the barkeep, "if those are the peppermint sticks I ordered." "Oh." Her eyes landed on Taza's chest, refocused, and dragged themselves up like a climber on a cliff. Apologies. "Yes, those." Taza handed her the jar with 2 fingers, and the small bow reserved for women who do not yet know if they are afraid. Miss Fitch took it with both hands and a tremble, then blushed at her own trembling. "Thank you, sir," she managed. "Truly." Styles sat down with a noise meant to be laughing. Sheriff Brady flexed his authority just enough to squeak. The barkeep, a man named Daly, also but of no relation, breathed again. Taza, left to the rattle of candy against glass. Saturday brought heat that pressed hats lower and tempers higher. In the afternoon, a wagon wheel shattered outside the mercantile and pinned a little girl beneath the tongue. Her foot caught. People converged in that panicky, generous way that breaks for lack of a plan. 3 men pulled at the wagon bed. It groaned and didn't rise. Need a jack. Someone shouted. Taza stepped in and didn't push them aside so much as become the place they weren't. He wedged his shoulder under the axle, planted his feet, and lifted. The wagon came up an inch, then two. The girl's mother yanked the small foot free. The whole thing crashed down, missing his toes because he knew exactly where they were. He stepped back, dusted his hands, and checked the girl's ankle. Purple already. Not broken, though. The mother started to thank him, saw his face, flinched, and instead thanked the sky, God, the sheriff, anyone, but the man who had lifted the wagon. That hurt in the old way, the familiar way that already had a callus. He did not stay within reach of her remorse. That night, the barn loft felt close. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the certainty of being measured wrong. He lay listening to the river's thin talk and the scuff-scratch of mice, and memory came like a train, after dark hard to stop and bright in the windows. He was a boy again, half grown in all angles, walking beside his mother along a wash, where willows nodded like they understood. She was not tall, and she did not need to be. She had a voice that turned grievance into a story, and story into instruction. Some places will make you into a giant when you are only yourself, she'd told him once, resting her palm against his forearm to make the point humane. Don't let them put you to use as a warning. Be a tree. Shade who needs it. Hold fast. Grow rings. He slept as if the barn itself were a hand cupped above his face. Another week gathered itself. Work, coffee, avoiding small wars. He carved too. Past the hours between jobs, thin scraps of wood shaved into horses, birds, a coyote so sly it almost winked. He left one on the school steps at dawn, nothing attached but intention. At recess, he watched from the shade while the children argued over custody, and then invented a game where the horse always chose his own rider. Miss Fitch's look found him, warmed, and dropped before it broke any rules. The sheriff tried different tactics. You planning on setting down roots here? Brady asked one afternoon, voice sliding around the question like it might be a puddle hiding a hole. I'm planning on paying for my meals, Taza said. The rest isn't a plan. Brady squinted, doing math that wasn't about numbers. We're a small town. Small towns notice the shape of things. He stuck his thumbs in his belt and waited to be thanked for a warning. I'll keep my shape to myself. Taza said sometimes loneliness turned to anger the way milk turns. It wanted to curdle. He refused it. Anger spent a man quicker than hunger. He gave it nothing to feed on. He wrote one more letter to Clara May in his head and never set it to paper. I don't blame you, he told the air. Some houses have low ceilings. Some skies are like that too. He folded the invisible page and burned it without flame. The summer sky finally tore itself open and rain came like somebody remembered what mercy was. The streets turned to pudding. The dust died happy, and the town smelled for 1 hour like a new idea. Taza walked in it and tilted his face. Drops hit him later than they hit anyone else. He smiled at that small, foolish fat dot in the mercantile window. An announcement curled, help wanted for lifting, hauling, and sense. Below it, in a woman's neat script, no peacocks. He liked the joke. He liked that somebody in Dry Creek made a joke that didn't point at a person. He almost went in then. But a ranch hand with a wet hat bumped his shoulder hard and said, watch yourself, Mountain. And the moment closed like a book that night again. The barn, the smell of rain in splinters and straw. A coyote barked as if the world needed a reminder. To be wild. Taza lay and listened. The town had measured him all week, each person with their own stick. He measured it back, not with judgment, but with the practical eyes of a man deciding whether to sleep another night in the same direction, across the river, A single window burned. He had noticed it before, late, steady, like someone wrote there. Own light without asking the moon. Sometimes he heard a hammer there after dark. Sometimes he heard nothing, and the silence felt industrious. A homestead being kept alive by stubbornness and hands. He didn't put a name to it. Loneliness teaches you not to guess at belonging. On Wednesday, the parlor piano fumbled through Shenandoah and found its way. On Thursday, Amos Daly taught him a knot he pretended not to know, so Amos could have the pleasure. On Friday, Styles lost too much at cards and looked around for someone to punish. He chose whiskey instead. On Saturday, the church bell cracked. A little and still called. And on a long-shouldered afternoon, when the heat lost interest and the flies lost their argument, Taza turned toward the mercantile with 3 dimes and a need for nails. He meant to buy a sack of flour if the price didn't bite too hard. He meant to ask about steady work in a voice that did not sound like begging and did not sound like pride. He meant, without knowing it, to step into the next part of his life. He pushed the door, and the bell struck a thin note. The air inside smelled of coffee, calico, kerosene, and patience. He could hear someone in the back, counting 8, 9, 10, and a quiet oath when the string tangled. He reached instinctively for the nearest stack, a tower of flour teetering on duty, and set his hand on it before it fell. His palm covered most of a sack. White dust ghosted up and kissed his knuckles. "Who's there?" Called a woman's voice, steady but busy. "If you've come to buy, you've also come to lift." "I can lift," Taza said. There was a pause, the kind that counts miles. Then footsteps, quick and unafraid, and a figure turned the corner with a ledger under one arm and a jar in the other. And she was smaller than him and taller than her shadow, and looked him in the face like the horizon was behind his eyes, not over his head, but that is another chapter. For now, count only this. 7 days of being measured wrong will make a man ready for one true measure. And loneliness, if it doesn't sour, seasons a person to taste the first kind word like rain. The mercantile had always been a place of dust and order. Rows of shelves stacked with calico bolts, tins of peaches that had traveled farther than most of Dry Creek's citizens, nails and lantern oil, sacks of flour and beans piled like squat sentinels. A brass bell hung over the door, and when Taza stepped inside, its tone cracked the air with the sound of his arrival. He paused just beyond the threshold. His height made the ceiling seem lower than it was, and the room smelled of ground coffee and new rope. A few customers turned to glance at him, then went on with their shopping, though he could feel their awareness following him like shadows. From the back came the voice. "If you've come to buy, you've also come to lift. These sacks don't move themselves." Her tone was neither fearful nor dismissive. It was practical. A woman's voice, steady with habit, colored by fatigue, but not defeat. Taza reached the flour tower before it toppled and held it, steady with one hand the way another man might steady a child. The curtain parted, and she appeared. Eliza Kane was not a woman who asked the world's permission to exist. She was tall. For a woman, though nowhere near his height, with hair pinned in a way that spoke of quickness rather than vanity. Her dress was plain brown, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A ledger rested in the crook of one arm, a jar of penny candy in the other. She stopped short when she saw him, eyes widening just enough to mark surprise, then settling into something calmer curiosity, maybe, or recognition. "Thank you," she said, glancing at the sacks under his hand. "Those like to lean on me. When I'm not looking." Taza inclined his head. "They lean lighter on me." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded toward the counter. "If you've come for supplies, set that roll of yours down. You look like a man who carries too much." He obeyed, placing his canvas bundle near the counter. Eliza moved to the scales, setting down the candy jar. Her hands were work-roughened, and her movements carried the efficiency of someone who had no time for flourishes. "What is it you need?" she asked. "Nails," he said. "And flour, if the price is kind." Her lips quirked at that. "Flour has never been kind. But I can spare you 10 pounds without robbery." She measured, bagged, and weighed. He watched, quiet. The air around them carried a strange balance, her ease in the work, his ease in silence, neither straining to fill the space with words. After a while, she glanced up. "I've seen you around town. You helped Mrs. Keene with her fence." Taza nodded once. "And the Caldwell calf." Again he nodded. She smiled faintly. "You've been busy proving yourself useful. Doesn't matter much what folks whisper when. A man proves his hands can earn." He met her eyes, and for the first time since he'd stepped off the train, he felt no need to look away. She did not glance up at his height like others. She did not measure him as an oddity. She looked straight at him, as though she'd already decided the angle of her gaze didn't matter. "I came here for someone," he admitted. "I know." Her voice was quiet, but steady. Clara May told half the town she'd received letters. When you arrived, everyone expected you'd be her man. Then she left the rest unsaid, but her pause carried the weight of Clara May's rejection. The whispers of "too tall," the way small towns collect a story and roll it around until it loses its edges. Taza said nothing. Eliza leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the counter. "She's not a cruel girl, just careful. Careful people make small choices so they can carry them without stumbling." His jaw tightened, but he answered evenly, "I don't blame her." For a time, the sound of beans being scooped into a sack filled the silence. Outside, wagon wheels clattered over stones, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. Finally, she asked, "And what now? Do you leave?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Work pays meals. I can stay as long as the work does." Eliza's eyes softened. She set down the ledger, stepped closer, and tilted her head as if to study the lines of his face more carefully. "You walk alone, don't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. For a heartbeat. Neither spoke. Then she reached out, lightly touching his arm. The touch startled him, gentle, deliberate. It was not pity. It was possession of another kind, acknowledgement. She leaned in just enough for him to feel her breath near his ear, and whispered, "You don't have to anymore. You're mine now." The words struck through him like an arrow, but there was no wound. Instead, there was a warmth he had not felt since childhood, since his mother's hand rested against his arm and told him he was enough. He blinked, slow, as if the world had tilted. He had been measured as too tall, too strange, too much. But here was a woman who measured him not against others, but against herself, and found him fitting. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, reverently, as if the moment demanded ceremony. "You say it," he murmured, voice rough, "like it is already true?" Her lips curved. "It is. You'll see." And in that instant, the mercantile dust. Shelves, sacks of flour felt less like a store, and more like a door opening. The rest of that afternoon blurred into new rhythm. Taza carried flour sacks to the storeroom as Eliza directed, fixed a loose hinge on the back door, and hauled a barrel that 2 other men had failed to budge. She paid him in more than wages, in conversation, in the easy cadence of someone who didn't look at him and see a mountain, but a man. And when evening came and the lamps flickered in their glass chimneys, she walked with him to the threshold. Townsfolk passed, whispering as they always did. But Eliza kept her hand brushing his sleeve, a gesture quiet but undeniable. For the first time since stepping off the train at Dry Creek, Taza did not feel like a shadow among men. He felt, perhaps, like a tree with roots beginning to take hold. Words replayed in his mind as he walked into the cooling dusk. "You're mine now." They sounded less like possession and more like salvation. The weeks that followed were stitched together with work, gossip, and the quiet defiance of two people who had chosen one another not at first. Taza and Eliza walked carefully through Dry Creek, their steps watched from porches and behind lace curtains. Children whispered, bold enough to giggle when they thought he could not hear. Men tipped their hats to Eliza with the kind of courtesy that said, "Why him?" Women raised brows and muttered into fans, but Eliza did not falter. She walked beside him, with her chin level, her voice steady, her hand brushing his sleeve as though it were the most natural place for it to be. And because she did not falter, neither did he dot the homestead. Eliza's homestead sat a mile outside of town, tucked against a line of willows where the river bent. The house was small, clapboard weathered to gray, roof patched with tin that rattled in the wind. A barn leaned against itself, and fences had gaps like missing teeth. When she first led him there, the sun was low, throwing long shadows across the grass. She stopped at the gate, looked at the place with tired eyes, and said, "It's been mine since my husband passed. I've kept it upright, but it needs more than two hands." Taza studied the sagging fence, the barn that whispered collapse, the way the land itself seemed to sigh for lack of care. He turned to her, voice even. "Two hands are enough if they are steady. 4 are better." She looked up at him, a smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. "Then let's see what we can make of it." From that day forward, the homestead became theirs. Work in quiet morning began with chores, mending fences, mucking the barn, planting rows of corn where weeds had claimed the field. Taza's strength turned back-breaking work into steady rhythm. Eliza's knowledge of the land, her careful records of what grew and what failed, made each effort purposeful. He lifted beams for the barn's roof while she hammered nails, her arms trembling but resolute. She laughed when he warned her about bent nails. "You think I've never hit my thumb before? I've been a widow 2 years. My hands are as stubborn as yours." At night, when the work was done, they sat on the porch. She read aloud from old books by lamplight, her voice soft against the crickets. He whittled birds, horses, once even a tiny carving of her face, which made her laugh and kiss his cheek. The house that had once been quiet with loneliness now hummed with life. The town's judgment creek did not remain silent. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Caldwell sniffed into her lace handkerchief. Imagine Eliza Kane tying herself to that giant. She must be desperate. To which Eliza, overhearing, replied evenly, "Not desperate, decisive." She set her coins on the counter and walked out with her flour. Head high, the Reverend Holcomb tried subtle warnings about unequal yokes during his sermons, but Eliza only folded her hands and stared him down until he fumbled his words. Taza sat outside the churchyard fence, as he always did, listening without crossing inside. When she exited, she slipped her hand into his, plain and unashamed. In front of everyone, the gossip did not stop, but it began to dull. Respect has a way of taking root when defiance does not waver. Acts of kindness, it was the small things that changed the town's eyes. When the Rojas family lost their roof to a summer storm, Taza carried beams on his shoulders like matchsticks, climbing the frame while others staggered. When the schoolyard needed repairs, he built a swing from lumber scraps, leaving it unclaimed until the children swarmed it with shrieks of delight. And when the gambler Stiles picked a fight with a young ranch hand in the saloon, it was Taza who stepped in not with fists, but by lifting the boy bodily out of reach and setting him gently outside, like moving a calf from under a wagon. Stiles blustered, but no one followed his laugh. People began to whisper differently. "He's tall. Sure, but look how he carries it. A night of quiet promises one autumn evening, after weeks of harvest, they sat on the porch watching the fields rest under the amber sky. The corn stood stacked, the barn roof no longer sagged, and the fences stretched straight and proud. Eliza leaned against him, her head at his shoulder. "It feels different now," she murmured. "What does?" "This land. This house. Me." She tilted her head to look at him. "As though it was waiting for you." Taza's throat tightened. He took her hand, roughened by work but warm. "I prayed once," he said slowly, "that if there was someone for me, she would find me. I thought I had prayed into empty sky." She squeezed his hand. The sky wasn't empty. It was just waiting for us to meet. The wind moved through, the willows like a song. In that moment, there was no loneliness, no judgment, no rejection. Only two people who had found in each other what the world said they would never have. Epilogue of the chapter over time. Dry Creek adjusted. They were no longer the widow and the giant Apache, but Eliza and Taza Kane names said with a grudging respect that grew, like corn, out of persistence and care. Children who once pointed now raced to the porch to see what toys Taza had. Carved. Neighbors who once whispered now borrowed tools or asked advice on crops. Even Reverend Holcomb, when illness struck him one winter, found Taza carrying firewood to his door without a word. For Taza, the world had narrowed to something simple and whole. A woman who whispered her mind now and meant it every day. After, a patch of land that bore the weight of their work, and a sky under which he was no longer too tall, but just tall enough to shelter what he loved. And so the drifter became rooted, the outcast became chosen, and the whisper of one woman turned into the foundation of a home.